Have you ever stopped to think about how just one document, from the White House can completely change the direction of major national policies? Sometimes even flipping things that were decided only a couple of years back.
It's a huge amount of power, really. And those changes can ripple out in ways we don't always see right away.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that kind of document. It's a recent executive order called Enforcing the Hyde Amendment, and it came out on January 24th, 2025.
Right. And our mission here, really, is to unpack what this new order actually does, why it's a big deal, and crucially, look at two other executive orders from 2022 that this new one explicitly cancels.
Yeah, we want to give you a really clear, neutral picture of this shift in federal policy around reproductive health care, and specifically federal funding.
The goal is for you to walk away feeling well-informed, not just about what changed, but the context, the why it matters, and maybe some of the bigger implications. We'll guide you through the key details and try to connect the dots.
Okay, so let's start with a new one. Enforcing the Hyde Amendment, January 24, 2025. What's the core purpose here?
Well, at its heart, this EO, coming straight from the president, aims to stop federal money from funding what the order calls elective abortion.
Elective abortion. Okay, that phrasing is important.
It is. And the order itself mentions that for, nearly 5 decades, Congress has passed the Hyde Amendment or similar laws every year. It's usually attached to spending bills, not a permanent law on its own.
Right, it's an appropriations rider.
Exactly. And its function is to block federal funds for most abortions, except typically in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. The order presents this as reflecting a long-standing consensus.
And it takes a direct shot at the previous administration, doesn't it?
It does. It claims the previous administration disregarded this established common-sense policy and essentially embedded forced taxpayer funding of elective abortions into various federal programs.
So the stated policy is crystal clear: to end the forced use of federal taxpayer dollars to fund or promote elective abortion, aligning with Hyde.
Precisely. And the really big action item, the one that drives our conversation today, is that it explicitly revokes, it cancels 2 specific previous executive orders.
Which ones were those again?
EO 148-076, that was from July 8, 2022, and EO 140-079 from August 3, 2022. Just gone.
Wow. So not just setting a new course, but actively tearing down the previous framework. What else does it do, practically speaking?
It tells the director of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to figure out the guidance for agencies on how to implement this.
Make it operational.
Yeah. And it includes the standard language, that it has to be done consistent with the law based on available funds, and it doesn't create new legal rights for individuals.
It really highlights the power of these executive orders, doesn't it? How quickly policy can pivot.
Absolutely. No need for Congress to pass a new law. The president directs the executive branch, and federal funds shift. Agency priorities change. It's fast and potent.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's look at the first order that got revoked. EO 1.076. Protecting access to reproductive health care services from July 2022. What was the context for that one?
Oh, the context was huge. It was signed right after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The order explicitly mentions Roe and how it had, for almost 50 years, outlined a constitutional right to make reproductive health care decisions.
So it was a direct response to that Dobbs decision.
Correctly. And it framed the Roe reversal in pretty strong terms, saying it had devastating implications, denied fundamental rights to privacy, autonomy, freedom, and equality. It wasn't just theoretical either.
What do you mean?
Well, it specifically pointed out the real-world consequences, threatening access to services, causing clinics to close, forcing people to travel often long distances, and it noted the disproportionate impact on low-income individuals, people in rural areas, other underserved communities. That focus on practical access was key.
So the goal was clearly stated: support women's right to choose and to protect and defend reproductive rights. How did it plan to do that? What were the main actions?
It laid out quite a few. A big one was tasking HHS, Health and Human Services, to quickly produce a report within 30 days.
A report on what?
On actions the federal government could take to protect and expand access to abortion care, including medication abortion, which is a key method now, and also the full range of reproductive health care services, like emergency contraception and family planning.
So trying to actively bolster access using federal power?
Right. And another piece was public information. It called for a public awareness campaign.
To tell people what?
Things like where they could get free or low-cost services, like at federally qualified health centers or Title X clinics, and also just basic know your rights information. which became really crucial in the confusion after Dobbs.
That makes sense. What about emergency care? That was a big concern, right? Hospitals potentially turning people away.
A huge concern. The order focused heavily on EMTALA. That's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. It basically says hospitals getting Medicare funds must provide stabilizing emergency care.
Regardless of ability to pay or the specifics of state law in that moment.
Generally, yes. The federal obligation under EMTALA is paramount in an emergency. This order pushed HHS to ensure full protections under EMTALA for pregnant people, including those having miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies, maybe by updating guidance. The goal was to prevent care delays caused by legal fear.
And it also tried to rally legal help.
Yes, that was quite strategic. It directed the Attorney General and the White House counsel to convene meetings with private pro bono lawyers, bar associations, public interest groups,
To get them involved.
to encourage them to provide legal assistance for patients needing services, for providers facing legal threats, even third parties helping someone access care. It was about building a legal defense network.
And then there was the whole bucket of privacy and safety concerns.
Absolutely critical post-Roe. The order asked the Attorney General and Homeland Security to look into actions to protect the physical safety and security of patients, providers, clinics, even pharmacies.
And digital privacy, too.
Yeah.
Data security.
Yes. It encouraged the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to protect consumer privacy around health data. It pushed HHS to strengthen protections under HIPAA, the health privacy law, and educate people about their privacy rights.
FC is so important there.
Crucial. And it also told HHS, working with the AG and FTC, to look out for deceptive or fraudulent practices online, like fake clinics or misinformation websites, a really comprehensive approach to safety and information integrity.
And coordination across government.
Yeah, it set up an interagency task force on reproductive health care access, co-chaired by HHS and the White House Gender Policy Council, just to make sure all these different federal pieces were working together. And the AG was supposed to give states technical help on understanding federal protections.
And it defined reproductive health care services very broadly.
Very broadly. Medical, surgical, counseling, referral services for the reproductive system, explicitly including pregnancy-related services, and termination of pregnancy.
Okay, so that's EO 14076. A really wide-ranging response. Now, what about the second one that was revoked? EO 14079, preserving access to reproductive health care services from August 2022. How did that fit in?
It definitely built on the first one, came out less than a month later. It repeated the concerns about the devastating implications of Roe's reversal. What's really interesting about this second order is that it actually highlighted things HHS had already done based on the first order.
So it showed progress, or at least action being taken.
Exactly. It was sort of a status update plus new directives. For example, it noted that HHS had already clarified EMTALA obligations for hospitals, specifically stating that stabilizing care could include abortion if necessary in an emergency.
Directly addressing that fear we talked about.
Yes. And it also mentioned HHS had issued guidance to retail pharmacies about their obligations under federal civil rights laws.
Like Section 504 in the ACA.
Right. The Rehabilitation Act and the Affordable Care Act non-discrimination provisions. The guidance was aimed at ensuring pharmacies provided equal access to comprehensive reproductive services, explicitly mentioning helping women experiencing miscarriages get needed medication.
But even with those steps, this second order pointed out ongoing problems.
It did. It acknowledged that things weren't solved. It cited the continued advancement of restrictive abortion laws in states, leading to, legal uncertainty and disparate access, patchwork legality.
And real-world harms were still happening.
Yes, it specifically mentioned ongoing reports of women being denied health and life-saving emergency care because providers were afraid of being sued or prosecuted. That chilling effect was persistent.
And you mentioned the pharmacy issue earlier, people being denied meds for other conditions.
That's right, and this order specifically called that out. Reports of people needing meds for things like lupus, arthritis, stomach ulcers, even cancer, being denied them because those same drugs could be used for medication abortion.
Even if that wasn't the prescription's purpose at all.
Correct. It showed these really damaging unintended consequences. It even cited one instance where a provider briefly stopped offering emergency contraception because of confusion over a state abortion law. Just widespread uncertainty.
So, given these ongoing issues, what new things did this second order direct?
It pushed HHS to go further. One key directive was for the HHS secretary to consider actions to improve access, specifically looking at using Medicaid to the extent permitted by federal law to help cover costs for patients who had to travel across state lines for medical care.
tackling that travel burden directly through potential funding?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It was a directive to consider it. It also doubled down on non-discrimination compliance.
How so?
It directed HHS to promote better understanding and compliance with federal non-discrimination laws among healthcare providers getting federal money, focusing on discrimination related to pregnancy, past, present, or potential. This meant more technical assistance, outreach to providers, maybe issuing new guidance based on complaints.
Really trying to enforce existing protections in this new context.
Exactly. And finally, it addressed data. It told HHS to look at improving research and data collection, especially at NIH and CDC, to actually measure the impact that losing reproductive health care access was having on maternal health outcomes.
Getting better data to understand the consequences.
Right, and the definition of reproductive health care services stayed the same as the first order.
Okay, we've unpacked the new 2025 order and the two 2022 orders it canceled. Let's try to synthesize this. What's the big picture when you put these three side by side?
Well, the big picture is a pretty stark reversal. The Enforcing the Hyde Amendment order from 2025 represents a fundamental shift away from the policies and the entire philosophy, really, laid out in those two 2022 orders.
So we went from a focus on access and protection, explicitly trying to counteract the effects of the Dobbs decision.
Right, using the levers of federal power to protect and even expand access to services, address emergency care, travel, privacy, non-discrimination.
To a policy now focused laser-like on preventing federal funding for elective abortions based on the Hyde Amendment.
Precisely. The differing philosophies are clear. One aimed to mitigate the impact of Roe's reversal and ensure access continues. The other aims to align all federal spending with the Hyde Amendment's restrictions and stop what it terms forced taxpayer funding.
So what does the revocation mean practically? All those specific actions from the 2022 orders, the MTALA guidance, the pharmacy issue focus, the task force considering Medicaid for travel, are those just off the table now?
Effectively, yes. By revoking the orders, the foundation for those specific federal initiatives and directives is removed. The new MTALA guidance, the specific focus on pharmacy denials related to reproductive health drugs, the interagency coordination on access, the exploration of Medicaid for travel, those are canceled as official administration policy priorities directed by executive order.
The focus narrows dramatically.
It shifts entirely to enforcing the Hyde Amendment's funding restrictions across federal programs. That becomes the primary lens through which federal actions related to these services are viewed.
And this matters to you, our listeners, because these aren't abstract policy debates. Executive orders shape how federal agencies spend money and set priorities.
Absolutely. It affects healthcare providers who rely on federal funding or guidance. It influences state policies, which often interact with federal rules. And ultimately, it can impact your access to certain healthcare services, depending on where you live, your insurance, and the specific care you might need.
These shifts aren't just happening in Washington, they have real consequences on the ground.
They really underscore how quickly and significantly presidential actions can change the landscape of national policy and people's lives.
Okay, so let's recap this deep dive. The main takeaway is that the recent Enforcing the Hyde Amendment executive order represents a major policy shift. It explicitly canceled two earlier comprehensive orders from 2022 that were designed to protect and expand access to reproductive health care services following the Dobbs decision.
Right. And in their place, it firmly establishes the federal government's stance as focused on preventing taxpayer funding for elective abortion, aligning policy strictly with the Hyde Amendment.
We've seen today just how powerfully and rapidly executive orders can reshape federal policy. It leads to a final thought. As these kinds of significant policy shifts continue to unfold, driven by executive action, what ripple effects do you anticipate seeing in the broader landscape of healthcare access, federal funding, and maybe even state-level actions in the coming years?
That's definitely something to keep watching.